Hey guys, it's Naif again. In this video, I'm going to show you how to implement a simple data access layer in Java. I'm going to use JDBC API along with MySQL as a data source. Okay, but you can apply these concepts and these patterns to any data source. Okay, so first thing, what do you mean by a data access layer or persistence layer? Well, data access layer is the part of the application that is responsible to store, retrieve, update, and delete data stored in the data source. Okay, and this data source could be a simple file, or it may be a database, relational database such as MySQL, Oracle database, or any other databases. Okay, so what we are going to do is that we'll try to implement the CRUD operations on simple entity. We'll create a book entity, okay, and then we'll try to implement the CRUD operations in persistence layer or data access layer. Okay, there are some tools that you need. You need to have MySQL installed in your machine. Also you need a Java IDE. Okay, also you need the jar file for MySQL connector. Okay, so MySQL Java connector, you can download that from the MySQL website. Okay, after that you can add the jar file to your class path, or if you are using build tools such as Maven or Gradle, then you can use them. Okay, so I'm going to use Maven to install the dependency since I'm using IntelliJ ID. Okay, so for the database, the structure of the database, we have a simple database. It's a library database. Okay, and we have only one table, which is books table. Okay, we will fill this table from the Java application after we implement the persistence layer. Okay, so let's do it. I will create a new project. Okay, I will select Maven to add the dependencies. Click next, then I will name my project as data access layer. Okay, I will keep this as it is. Okay, so finish. Okay, so now I need to add the dependencies to the form file. Okay, so dependencies. Okay, and let me add the dependency. Okay, this is the group ID is MySQL. Okay, that was fast. Okay, so now let's create some package in order to organize our code. I'll create our first package which will store our entities. So entities. Okay, and then let me create another package. Okay, so persistence. This package will contain DAO classes and the code that is responsible to store or to interact with the database. Okay, also we need simple package. I will call it util. So in here I'm going to create my classes that is responsible to create the connection for us. Okay, maybe we need another package, but we'll see it. So let's create the first class. This class will be connection manager. Okay, which will be responsible to create the connection and close the connection and all operations related to the connection. Okay, actually this class will be a Singleton class. Okay, since we need only one instance of this class. I hope you guys are aware what is Singleton. Okay, so let's call that static connection manager. I will call it instance. Okay, and we'll make the constructor private. So private, and here we'll do the setup for our connection. Okay, we'll load the driver and connect to the database. Okay, so what we need, also we need a connection. Okay, in order to initialize it and return it to other parts of the application. Okay, so private connection. Okay, from the SQL package connection. Okay, and here using driver manager, driver manager, we will load the connection. Okay, so this will return for us a connection, right? So here we need URL and we need username, also a password to connect to the database. Okay, let me call it password. Okay, so let me create these variables and I will load them from a configuration file. Okay, also string user, this is username, password. Okay, these values I will load them from a properties file that I will create in a minute. Let's handle the exception here using try catch. So let me add try catch. Okay, Good. So now let's create properties file. Okay, I will go to the resources and I will create file. I will call it db config.properties. Okay, actually you can hard code them, but I don't like that. Okay, so we'll have URL, okay, which will be JDBC MySQL localhost, okay, 3306, and the database will be library, right? And the username will be root for mine, password equals root. Okay, now let me load this properties file. Let's create an instance for properties. Props equals new properties. Okay, and we'll load this from an input stream. So new file, input stream, and this file is located at source. From here, guys, source, then main resources and db config.properties. Okay, let's handle the exception here. I will I will add this. I will make all this inside the try, and then we'll add catch. So after loading the props instance, we will load the URL from this instance. So props.get property, get property, which is the URL as we did it here, right? And then same thing for the username and the password. Okay, so props.get property, username, the password. Okay, and that's it. Okay, so now we can manage our credentials from here and the URL also. This is better actually. Okay, as we create an instance for this class, okay, the connection will be loaded from the driver manager, but we need to assign it to the connection instance, right? So this dot connection equals. Okay, so now we need a global access point to access this instance and then retrieve this connection. Okay, so let me create that. So this will be public static, and we will retain from the same type. So we called our class connection manager, so connection manager get instance. Okay, and to make this instance, we'll check first if the instance is null. Okay, same singleton, guys. So now to make this thread safe, we'll synchronize it with the connection manager dot class. Okay, and here we will create a double check. Okay, so if instance equals null, or if our connection is closed, we need to create the instance again, right? So we'll say if instance dot connection, okay, dot is closed. So if it is the case, what we need to do now, we'll handle this exception actually. We will create a new instance. So we'll say instance equals a new connection manager. Okay, and at the end we will retain the instance. Okay, so let me handle this exception. So surrounded try catch. Yeah, we may check this one actually. Maybe we need to add the same condition here. Okay, if the connection is closed, and take the try outside this one. Okay, SQL exception, and we will print the stack trace. Okay, and that's it. Okay, so this will be thread safe. We can use actually the inner class in here, but it's okay. So now let's create another method to close the connection. So this will be void. Let's say close. Okay, and in here we'll check if this dot connection dot is not null. If it's not null, okay, then we will close the connection. So connection dot close. Okay, and also around this try catch. Okay, so now let's start creating the entity class. Okay, so this will be a simple class. I will call it book entity. Each book contains simple simple title and first ID, I guess, right? Yeah, ID, title, and price. So let's say private long, or maybe integer. Okay, it's up to you guys. And also we will have another property for the title and another one for the price. Okay, let me create the constructor. Okay, and also create the setters and getters. Also we may need the toString. Okay, so toString. Okay, so this is the class that will represent our entity in the database, right? Okay, now we need to create the DAO, or the data access object, which will be an interface that contains the main operations. So we'll create a simple interface, right? So I will call it, actually let's try to extract the main operations, the common operations between the entities in a separate interface, and then we'll add another interface that specific to the book entity. Okay, so I will call this one CRUD operations. Okay, and it will be an interface. So CRUD operations. Okay, this interface, it will be common between all the entities, since all entities actually they need to save, to create, read, update, and delete the data, right? And this will be generic. Okay, since we can deal with an entity type. Okay, so let's create the basic operations. For the save operation, you can make it the return type, you can make it void, or maybe you can retain the entity that you stored. So I will retain T. That means I will retain the entity that I stored in the database, right? So let's say void, save. Okay, I will take the entity as a parameter. I will call it entity. Okay, and then we need another operation that will retrieve our entity, okay, by the ID. So let's call it find by ID. Okay, and this will retain for us an optional, since maybe the ID, the entity, it may not exist, right? And for the ID we can say long. Okay, but this will be specific for ID that the type is long, but maybe it's not the case always, right? So this type we can take it another generic type. Okay, another type parameter. So I will say here ID. Okay, since the ID maybe it become string, long, integer, or any other types, right? And okay, here you can say you'll retain T, but you are not sure you will find an entity that matches this ID, right? So that's why you should use optional, okay, of T. Okay, good. Now we'll create a list of T for find all. Okay, so this will retain all the entities for the all the entities for this type. Okay, also we need a simple update operation. Let's call it update. Okay, we will retain the entity that we update, so let's call it update. Okay, we will take the entity itself, okay, the new data, and also the ID for to know which entity we should update, right? Finally we have the delete operation. Again, it will take an ID in order to remove the record that matches this ID. Okay, good. So now we have the basic CRUD operations. Now each interface or each entity need this operation. They can create their own interface and implement these operations. Okay, so now let's create our DAOs. I will create another package that contains our DAO implementation. Now let's create another interface for let's name it book DAO. Okay, now we need these operations, right? And also we can add the operations that is specific to the book DAO. Okay, so let's say extends, since it's an interface, CRUD operations. Okay, so CRUD CRUD operations, and in here we will deal with book entity, so that's why we'll replace this by book entity, and the ID will be long or integer, right? I think integer in the book entity. Yeah, we have integer. Okay, good. So now let's add the operations that the book DAO may need. So let's say we have list, okay, of book entity. Actually, at the next layer we can replace this entity by another model. So now let's create another operation. Let's say find all by, okay, and we will pass a predicate maybe. Okay, so we will pass a predicate of type book entity and call it predicate. So here we can pass predicate, so we will return only the records that match the or this predicate, right? So that's why I will pass here predicate. Okay, now let's create the class or the implementation class that implements these operations. Okay, so I will create now the class. I will call it book DAO implementation. Okay, and we'll implement the book DAO. And now let me implement the methods. Okay, so implement methods. Okay, so how to start now implementing the operations? First thing, we need an instance for the connection, since now we will connect to the database and perform these operations, right? So let's create a simple instance for the connection manager. Okay, we'll call it instance equals connection manager dot get instance, and from this we'll create maybe a simple connection. Okay, and this will be final. Let's say connection. Okay, connection equals instance dot we didn't retain the connection, right? Yeah, we need here to create a simple method that retain the connection for us. So in here we'll say get connection. Okay, so these two instances will be used inside these methods, right? So now let's create the logic that will store the data. So how to store the data? First thing, we need to create a prepared statement. So let's say connection dot prepared statement, and here we will have our SQL statement, right? So let's create that. Let's say final string SQL. This is the query. Okay, so insert into box. Will the ID will be auto generated, so we need two columns only, title and a price. Okay, values, this is the placeholder. Now let's handle the exception. Okay, actually this can be created in the try with resource. Okay, but let me make this instance. Okay, so now let's handle the exception. Okay, but I will use try with resources in here. Okay, so to close this resource after we finished without saying finally again. Okay, now we need to fill in this input. So let's say prepared statement dot set string, which is the first parameter, and this is the title of the entity, so get title. Okay, the same thing for the second parameter, but let's say double. Okay, and get price. Good. Okay, then we need to execute our query. So prepared statement dot execute update, actually, since we are inserting, so execute update. Okay, here maybe we need to close the connection, so let me also make this instance. So connection, it's instance actually dot close. Okay, let's call this one connection manager. Good. And now after we finished creating this instance in the database and we add it, we need to maybe return the same entity. Okay, if we have any other logic that maybe transform this entity to other types, this will come from the other layer. Okay, such as surface layer. Okay, so now let's create the second method or implement it. Find by ID. It's very easy. It's similar to the one that we did before, but we need select a query, not the execute, not the updated query. Okay, so let's create let's create a simple prepared statement. Okay, this connection dot prepare statement, and we'll create here the SQL statement. Okay, so let me create the SQL statement. So SQL equals find by ID, so I'll say select all thing from box where ID equals. Okay, and in here let's handle the exception. So now we need to fill the parameter. So set it's an integer, right? So set integer, and it is the ID here. Okay, so ID. Okay, and then execute query. So prepared statement dot execute a query. Okay, so yeah, I forgot to pass the index for the parameter. Okay, so now this will return for us a result set, as you know. So result set, and actually we can create a nested try with resource. Okay, so result set equals. Okay, and in here we will return the entity. Okay, so let's create this entity, but first let's check if we have a result. So if result set dot next. Okay, if it's the case, then that means we have at least one record, right? So now we can access this data. So we need to access the title first and then the price. Okay, so get first, so get string, okay, which is the first column, or the second column actually. Yeah, we written them all, so we'll start from the ID. So ID, title, and price. Okay, so this will be the ID. Let me define it here. Integer. Okay, ID equals, but we have another ID. Let me call it book ID equals result set dot get integer. This is the first column. Okay, it starts from 1, not from 0. Okay, and we have string. This is the title, so get string. This is the second column. Okay, and also we have a price, so price equals result set dot get double. Okay, this is the third column. Okay, now we have the data, so now we can create the instance. So entity, buck entity. So buck entity. Okay, buck entity equals new buck entity, and we can pass these values now. Title and what else? Price. Okay, now let's return an optional. Okay, of this entity. Okay, if we didn't return from here, so that means we didn't find the entity, so we should return an empty. So optional dot empty. Okay, good. So this is the simple find by operation. Okay, now let's implement the find all operation. So it's similar actually to this one, but we need to create a simple list, right? Okay, so first we need our SQL query. Okay, so SQL equals, it will be select all thing from box. Okay, since we need to return them all. Okay, now let's try to create the preferred statement. So guys, we didn't close in here the connection, so connection manager dot close. Okay, yeah, so prepared statement equals connection dot prepare statement with this query, and let me add the catch block. Okay, SQL exception and exception dot print stack trace, and in final block we will close the connection. So connection manager dot close. Okay, let's execute this statement. So execute query. Okay, we'll have result set equals, and let's make this inside the try with resource. Okay, so now we will loop through the result set. Next, and let's extract each row and create an instance, then add it to the list. Okay, so the same thing actually we can create a separate method that accepts the result set and extract the data for us to avoid the duplicate code. Okay guys, again create a separate method that accepts result set, extract the value, create the instance, and then return it. It's better. Okay, so now all we need is extracting the values, so book ID, title, price, creating the entity, and then we will create a simple list. Okay, so list of book entity. Okay, so book entity list equals a new array list. Okay, and in here book entity list dot add this entity, which is book entity. Okay, now what we need to do, so yeah, we are looping through the result set. Okay, extracting the values, creating the entity, and return it. Okay, so at the end of the method we will return the list, so book entity list. If we don't have any records, it's okay, since we are going to return an empty list, and that's fine. Okay, now the update operation. Okay, how to update that? Again, it's simple. We'll create simple query, so string SQL equals update box set. We'll update only the title and price. Okay, so title equals comma price equals where ID equals. Okay, so this will be ID. Okay, so now let's try to create the statement, but let me add the catch first. So SQL exception dot print stack trace, and finally we need to close the connection. Okay, now in here we'll create the prepare statement. Prepare statement equals connection dot prepare statement with the SQL query that we passed. Okay, and here, since we are updating, we need to execute this query using update, using execute update, right? So prepare statement dot execute update. Okay, and if that's fine, we need to return the new entity that we updated right now, right? So we need maybe to call it again. Okay, maybe we can call this entity, or simply returning the new entity. Okay, yeah, we can do that actually. So we can return it. So let me return the we will return it at the end, since we need always to return an entity. It's not an optional. Okay, so I will return it here, return. But maybe actually the entity, it doesn't exist, right? So maybe we need to check if this entity is already there or not. So maybe this should be an optional. Okay, so let me make it an optional. Okay, so optional, and let's update that. Optional book entity. Okay, let's say here this is the number of rows that affected. So fn, so if n is greater than 0, then we did the update, right? So we need to return this entity, so optional entity. Okay, if it's not the case, we need to return an empty optional. Okay, now we need to implement the delete operation. Actually, it's very easy. Okay, we need to use a lot of this code, so let me copy it. So let's say here delete from box where ID equals to the ID that we passed in here. Okay, so yeah, this is the same. This method is void, so we are not returning anything. Okay, okay, so execute update, and we are closing the connection here, and that's it. If there is no exceptions from the service layer, we can return another value, such as string or any other value. Right? Okay, so find all by, it's simple. All we need to do is retrieving all the all the records and then loop through the results and then apply the predict on them using filter, right? So list book entity list equals find all. Okay, now this method will bring to us all the records. Okay, so I will apply this predicate on this list. Okay, so book entity list dot let's say stream dot filter based on this predicate. Okay, and we'll collect them as a list, so collect them as a list. Okay, and let's reassign this list. Okay, and now we'll return it, so book entity list. Okay, and that's it for this operation. Okay, we can do better actually in this method, but in order to make it simple, I just call the find all method and then apply this predicate on the result. So this will filter the results in here based on this predicate that you will send from another layer. Okay, so now I think we have implemented this method completely. Okay, let's now try to test that. Okay, from the main application. Let me close all of this. Okay, now we can create another layer, which is the surface layer, in order to provide an interface for these operations, and we can use the surface layer from the layers above that, such as presentation layer or any other layers, right? So I will create a new package. I will call it surface package or surfaces package, and in here I'll create simple interface. Okay, which is the let's call it book surface. Oops, this should be an interface. Okay, so here we'll define the operations for the book surface. It's similar to this one actually. Okay, it's similar to this one, but this one is but the surface layer is closer to the domain objects than the low level storage. Okay, so okay, so first we need to store an object, so we call that save, and this if you remember, okay, I will copy these operations, okay, to the surface layer. Okay, and I'll replace this. Why I'm creating the book surface layer? Because maybe I'm dealing with the domain classes or domain objects, so I can create another a class such as book. Okay, so now I can deal with books, not with book entities. That's why we are creating here the surface layer, and we can also create the business logic inside this layer. Okay, not inside the persistence layer. The persistence layer is responsible to deal with the code that is responsible to store the data with the database or the data source. Okay, so if we have any business logic, we can write it here in the surface. Right, now let's create another type that represents the book model itself. Okay, not the entity. Okay, so maybe we need to present the data in other forms, or maybe we need to manipulate them, transfer them. We have a lot of options that we can use the DTO pattern to do that, which is the data transfer object, right? So okay, let me create another object. I will make it inside models properties or package. Okay, I will name this one book, and this is simple. All we need to do, we have only the title maybe, okay, and the price. Okay, if we have other data, we can add them here. Okay, so let's say double price. Okay, maybe you'll have such thing like let's say private author like this. Okay, so you can collect the data that you want in here inside this model. Okay, see in here the data access layer, all the types of the entities that we are dealing with are book entities, right? In the surface layer you need to deal with another type that is closer to your domain, right, which is the book. So how to do that? From the book surface you need to call the method that provided by the DAO, okay, and then do the map from the book entity to the book and then return the book. Okay, I will create it for you, no problem. So let's create a constructor. Okay, let's create also setters and getters. Now we have this. Also we maybe need a toString. You will see why this is useful in a minute. Okay, now let's see. Yeah, here we will return the book, okay, itself. Okay, so here book. This is the entity actually. Okay, and also find all. This will be of type book. Okay, and the ID is integer if you remember. Okay, find all, again book, integer, and this will be book, and this will be book. Okay, and this will be integer. Okay, maybe I can say string, right, in order to return a message. Okay, so now we need to implement these operations using the data surface the surface implementation class. Okay, so let's create the class. So book surface implementation. Okay, this class implements book surface interface. Okay, and let me implement that. This class will need a dependency which is the book DAO. Okay, so book DAO, okay, equals a new book DAO implementation. Okay, and then here we can call this method. So now all we need to do is book DAO save. This will take a book entity, not a book. Okay, so what we need to do, we need to map from book to a book entity. Okay, so we can create a book entity in here. So book entity, okay, and then retrieve the data. So we don't need an ID, so I can pass 0, or maybe we can create another constructor. So let's create another constructor inside the book entity. So book entity, let's create a non-arc constructor. Okay, this is select none. Okay, so from here, okay, yeah, so now I can fill this property. So set title, we can access it from the object that we have passed, and book entity set price book dot get a price. Okay, then yeah, now we have this book entity. We can pass it in here, right? Okay, so this will return for us a book entity, so we can store it. Let's say saved book entity. Okay, now we need to map or transform from the book entity to the book. Okay, so return, or maybe we can we will map actually. Okay, so I will create book, or maybe we can return this entity simply since we'll store it, right? So let's first check if this actually has a value or not. Dot so let's check if saved entity dot actually this is returning what? Yeah, this returning the book entity, so it's not an optional. We may return this directly, but this type is book, so we'll create a book. I think it's similar to this one, right? We don't have to create any mapping, so simply we'll say book. If there is no errors, this statement will be executed, and then it will be returned, right? Okay, so yeah, let's now see the other operations. Okay, so inside find by, all we need to do is that this dot book DAO find by ID, which ID, this ID, and we need to return an optional of book. So we need to create the mapping again. Okay, so now we can extract this operation. Since we need to map every time, we need to create maybe another class or another package, okay, to make the mapping for us. So yeah, I will create it in here. So I will call this mappers, okay, and let's say book entity mapper. Okay, we can create actually an interface first, then implement it. Okay, so let's me create an interface. So book mapper. Okay, we need to map from, let's say, entity to model. Okay, so to a model, that means we'll retain a book. Okay, and we'll transform from book entity. So book entity. Okay, also we need the opposite. So book entity, so model to entity. Okay, so we'll receive a book, this book. Okay, you can name these methods as you like. Okay, so now let's implement these two methods. Book mapper, yeah, let me implement them. Okay, so from entity to book, all we need to do, let me create first a non-arc constructor inside the class. So models, let's create non-arc constructor. Okay, and from here, sorry, from the mapper, we will say book equals a new book, and then book dot set title entity dot get title, and book dot set price entity dot get price. Okay, and then retain the book, and that's it. Okay, the opposite is that we need to transform from book to an entity. So let me create a book entity. Okay, so book entity equals a new book entity. Okay, and in here book entity dot set title book dot get title, and book entity dot set price book dot get price. Okay, and now we need to retain the book entity. Okay, so now we have two methods that will help us doing the mapping. Okay, now we can replace this code by the mapper. So let me use the mapper. We called it, yeah, book entity mapper. No, book mapper first. Okay, book mapper equals a new book entity mapper. This is the implementation class, and book mapper dot we need from model to an entity, so we'll pass the book, and this is our entity, and we can now remove this code. Now it's much cleaner, right? Okay, if we need to map, we can map actually again from entity to the model. Okay, so now in here we have this find by from the DAO. Okay, that takes the ID of the entity and returns, and to return it an optional of entity. Okay, so let's first check if this entity exists or not. So book entity, okay, book optional. Okay, so if entity optional dot is empty, we'll throw an exception. You can create a custom exception here, such as book not found exception, but we'll throw a simple exception, runtime exception. Book with ID was not found. Okay, if you have any other business logic, you can do it in here. Okay, otherwise, if it's not empty, that means we have an entity. We can extract that using the get method. This will retain for us a book entity, as you can see. So book entity, so book entity equals, now we can use the mapper. Let me extract this mapper in here. Okay, so private final, and we can use it here. Okay, so mapper, so book mapper dot, so from entity to model, right? So from entity to model, book entity, this will return for us a book. We don't need this to return an optional, right? We can make it return book simply. Okay, so return or throw an exception. So let me update the surface. Okay, so find by, this will return a book, or we will throw an exception. Okay, simple. Okay, now in here, similar to the find all, but we are returning a book, so we need to map them. Okay, so this dot book DAO find all, this will return for us an list of book entity. So list of book entities. Okay, let's call it book entity list. And now let me create the list of book. Okay, so book list equals a new array list. We can make this code shorter actually. Okay, now we need to map from entities to the models, right? So book entity list dot stream dot map. Okay, so we need to map the entity to what? To a new model, a new book, right? So we need to use the mapper. So book mapper dot, so entity to model. Which entity? This entity. Okay, we may need to add it in here to this list, or let me replace it first with lambda expression and then collect that as a list. Okay, and then this list will be like this. This is simpler. Okay, and now we need to return the book list. Okay, actually we can make the code shorter, right, by using like this. Okay, good. Okay, so what else we have? The update operation, it's the same. Okay, maybe we need to return an update a book directly. So let me update the service. Okay, let me return a simple book. Okay, so now this dot book DAO dot update, but the entity in here is a book, so we need to map this one. So book mapper dot, so model to entity. Which model? This book, right? And this is the ID, and this will return for us a book entity. So we need to check for that first. So optional of book entity. Okay, optional book entity, and in here if optional book entity dot is empty, we'll throw an exception. Okay, so throw a new runtime exception. It's the same exception that we thrown already. Okay, so if it's not the case, if we have an instance, a record, we need to extract that. So optional book entity dot get, this will return an entity. Okay, and using the mapper we can map from entity to a model. Okay, and return that. Okay, so this is the update operation in the surface interface or the implementation class. Okay, simply here we need to say book DAO dot delete with this ID. Okay, if there is no exception thrown, we can simply return this string. Alright, so book has been deleted successfully. Okay, and by this we have finished our surface class implementation. Okay, now let's test that from the main class or from the app. Now we have two layers, the persistence layer. Okay, this is the persistence layer, and we have surface layer. So the application should deal with this layer, the surface layer. Okay, yeah, this layer. Okay, so now let's create a simple package. This could be the controller, the presentation layer. I will call this core. Okay, and in here I will create a simple app class, and now I will use the surface. So surface, box surface. Okay, new box service implementation, and in here let's start with the safe. Okay, new box, let's say Java programming. Okay, and the price, let's say 14949. okay, so let me run this application. Okay, so the table now it's empty, right? If this worked as expected, we should now have one row in the table. Okay, here we go. Now we have this row. Okay, so that means the safe operation works good. Now let's test another operation. So find by ID. The ID here is 1. The ID is auto-generated, right? So this ID is 1. So find by 1. This will return for us a book. So let me just print that. So run. Okay, and here is the book from the database, right? So let me add some, and let me save. Suppose we have this box. So now let me execute. Oops, connection closed. Yeah, why is that? I guess because we have closed the connection. The save operation, I guess from here, right? Or maybe from the try with resource, because this one will be closed after executing the query, right? Yeah, this one the problem. Okay, so we should not close this connection. So now let me check the, yeah, here we have. Okay, so we don't need to close the connection if we have a lot of operations. So let's try find by 3, ID 3. Okay, this is Swift. Now let's test the find all. This will return a book list. I will print that directly. Let me run. This should bring all the books in the database. Okay, and here it is. Okay, good. So now let's try the find by. Okay, so find, yeah, we didn't implement that. So let's go back to the surface layer. Okay, so let's create the find all by. Okay, and in here we need to pass the predicate. Okay, this predicate should be of type book. Okay, but for now I will take it like book entity, but it's better to be of type book, since we don't need to deal with any entities in here. Okay, but for the time I will make it entity. And now we need to implement this method. Okay, all we need to do is calling the method. So find all by, and we need to pass the predicate. Okay, so this will return for us a list of book entity. We need to transfer them as we did with this one. Okay, so yeah, from here. Okay, so find all by, this will return for us a list of book entities. We did the mapping in here, and finally we collect them, then we return them. Okay, so now let's see how to use this from the main. So find all by, as you can see, guys, here we are dealing with book entity, which is bad. Okay, we should not do that, but it's okay for us to try things only. Okay, so find all by, here we will create a simple predicate. Okay, let me create a predicate in here, predicate of book entity. Okay, e, and then we should return a box that is let's say price greater than 100. Okay, so let's see. Okay, now this should return for us all the box greater than the price greater than 100. Okay, so let's see which one will return. So I guess all of them. So let's say 100, 200. Let me check this table. So these three, which is Python, C++, Go. So Python, C++, and Go. Yeah, it's working. Okay, so now we can pass any predicate in here. Okay, so yeah, it's working as expected. Now let's try the delete. Let me delete the third book. Say so the book with ID 3 should be deleted. Okay, no value specified for okay, so we have an error in the book. So yeah, we didn't set the parameter. So one ID. Okay, let me test now. Okay, good. So the 3 should be removed now. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so now let's test the update method. So update. Okay, we will send the new data. Let's say Java updated. Okay, and the price is, let's say, 900. Okay, so which ID? First book. Okay, so this should update the first book. Okay, we have, yeah, again I didn't specify the parameter, so yeah, my mistake again. We have 3 parameters. Oh, okay, so prepared statement dot set string. This is the title. So this will be yeah, entity dot get title. Okay, and again prepared statement dot set double the second parameter, which is entity dot get price, and finally set integer for the third parameters, which is the ID. Okay, okay, so now let's run the program. Yeah, here we go. So the one should be updated now. Here we go, Java updated, and the price also updated. So all the operations now are working as expected. So this is how to implement simple data access layer. I know we have a lot of classes, but I prefer to use these patterns actually. So our application is scalable and can be extended easily, right? Okay guys, I hope you find this useful. I see you in later videos. Okay, bye.